He said it at my husband's own funeral. Not in some private moment, not in a car on the drive home, not in the hushed conspiratorial corner of a restaurant where people say the things they mean to keep hidden. He said it at the reception, in the living room of the house where Harold and I had lived for 16 years, where the photographs were still on the walls and Harold's reading glasses were still on the side table, because I had not been able to move them, where the people who had loved my husband were still holding their plates of food and trying to find something true to say to each other in the wreckage of an afternoon like that. He said it to his wife. He didn't see me standing in the hallway. She won't last long, Derek's low, certain. The tone of a man making an assessment he had already made several times and was simply confirming out loud. Place like this, she can't maintain it on her own. 6 months, maybe. Then we talk about the estate. His wife said something I couldn't hear. I'm not worried, Derek said. Dad was old-fashioned about these things. It'll go the right way. I stood in the hallway outside my own living room, and I held a cup of tea that had gone completely cold, and I listened to my stepson explain the timeline of my disappearance. And then I set the cup very carefully on the hall table, the one Harold had refinished the summer before last, the one with the small circular mark from a coffee cup that I had always meant to fix and now would not fix, because the mark was Harold's, because Harold had set his cup there 1,000 mornings, and I was not going to sand away 1,000 mornings, and I went upstairs. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that, because it matters to the story. I did not cry. I sat on the edge of the bed Harold and I had shared for 16 years, in the room that still smelled like his aftershave, and I was completely dry-eyed and completely still. And I thought, he doesn't know. Welcome to Alpha Mom Stories, where the things whispered over a widow's head are never the last word. Stay with me until the very end. This story took 2 years to fully arrive at, and I am going to give you every part of it, because the parts that seem slow are the ones that made the ending possible. Subscribe if you haven't. Leave a comment. I read all of them, everyone, and I am grateful for everyone. My name is Sylvia Marsh. I am 72 years old. For 28 years, I worked as an accountant, not a bookkeeper, not a data entry clerk, an accountant, the kind who sits across from people in the worst financial moments of their lives and tells them what is actually true about their situation in language they can understand and act on. I have looked at fraudulent expense reports and tax documents assembled to deceive and financial statements constructed to mislead. And I have found, in almost every case, the thing that was hidden. Numbers do not lie. They can be arranged to suggest false things, but the truth is always in there somewhere, patient as stone, waiting for someone to look in the right place. I tell you this so you understand something about who Derek was dealing with. I met Harold Marsh 20 years ago. He was 61. I was 52. We met at a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend, where Harold spent the first hour arguing cheerfully with retired judge about property law, and the second hour finding out everything there was to know about me, with the focused attention of a man who has decided something and wants to be thorough about it. We were married 18 months later, in a small ceremony in the garden of the house on Pembroke Lane, the house he had owned for 11 years, and that became our house the afternoon I moved my things in. And Harold cleared half the closet and said very seriously that the left side was structurally superior and he was giving it to me. I loved him. I want to say that plainly before anything else, because this story is going to require me to talk about money and wills and legal instruments, and I do not want any of that to obscure the thing underneath it, which is that Harold Marsh was one of the finest people I have ever known, and his death at 79, after 18 months of an illness that we managed, as well as 2 organized and determined people can manage something like that, was the worst thing that has happened to me in 72 years of things happening. He died on a Wednesday morning in March, quietly in his own bed, with me beside him, which was what he had asked for and what I was able to give him. I held his hand. He knew I was there. At the end, he said something I will not share because it was between us, private and complete. And some things are too important to become a story someone else tells. But I am telling you everything else. Harold had 2 children from his first marriage. His daughter, Pamela, who lives in Portland and who flew in the moment I called her, and who held my hand at the funeral, and who called me every day for 2 months afterward. Not because she felt she had to, but because she is the kind of person who understands that grief in an empty house is a specific and serious thing. And Derek is 54. He is Harold's son from a marriage that ended badly. Harold was honest with me about this, as he was honest about everything, explaining in that careful way of his that the divorce had been necessary and right, but that it had made Derek's childhood difficult in ways that neither Harold nor his first wife had handled as well, as they should have. Derek had grown up angry at his father in the particular way of children who feel abandoned, even when the abandonment was more complicated than that word suggests. He had grown up and become a man who presented warmly at the surface, good at the dinner table, good social situations, capable of a charm that I recognized from the first year of my marriage to Harold as something he turned on and off rather than something that was simply there. Harold knew Derek's limitations. He loved him, without illusion, the way parents love children who are difficult, fully, and with open eyes, and with the particular grief of a father who sees himself in his son's worst qualities and cannot fix what he partly caused. Harold had supported Derek financially more than he had ever told Derek he was doing, managing money into accounts in ways that kept Derek comfortable while not producing in Derek the awareness of how comfortable Harold's generosity had made him. He did this because he felt he owed Derek something for the difficult years, and because he understood that telling Derek the full extent of it would produce a sense of entitlement that was already, without full information, operating at a level Harold found troubling. I knew all of this. Harold told me, not all at once, but in the accumulation of 16 years of evenings and mornings and drives and the conversations that happen between people who have decided to know each other completely. He told me because he trusted me, and because he wanted me to understand Derek accurately, rather than through the polished surface Derek preferred to present. What Derek did not know, what he had no way of knowing because Harold had chosen not to tell him, was the full shape of what Harold had been building since the year before we married. The trusts, the structures, the careful financial architecture of a man who had spent his career as a civil litigator watching estates torn apart by exactly the kind of person his own son was becoming, and who had decided, with the particular thoroughness of someone who knows exactly what the risks are, to make sure it could not happen here. Derek thought he knew the situation. He thought he understood the estate, the house, the accounts, the shape of what his father had left. He had been forming this understanding from a distance, through inference and the occasional conversation with Harold that Harold had managed carefully. For years. He was wrong about nearly all of it. But I did not know yet, on the afternoon of the funeral, standing in the hallway with a cold cup of tea, exactly how wrong he was. I knew some of what Harold had built. I did not yet know all of it, because Harold, who was precise and thorough and had an engineer's relationship with sequencing, had left me instructions for how and when to find out. I need to tell you about those instructions. 3 weeks before Harold died. He was still himself then, still reading, still interested in the newspaper and the birds at the garden feeder and the question of whether the back porch railing needed replacing before spring. He asked me to sit with him at the kitchen table. He had a folder. Harold's folders were legendary in this house. Color-coded, labeled in his particular handwriting, organized in a system that I had learned over 16 years and that Pamela called the archive, affectionately, because it contained the full documented history of everything Harold had ever considered important enough to write down. He had a folder for the house maintenance records, one for each major appliance, one for his medical history going back 20 years, one for the garden, labeled with the Latin names of the plants, which he knew and I did not, and which had always made me smile. The folder on the kitchen table that evening was blue. He had told me once that he used blue for the things that mattered most. I want to go through some things with you, he said, not all at once. I know it's a lot, but I want you to know where everything is and what it means. We sat for 3 evenings. He walked me through it. The house, its title, its status, what it was worth, what I would need to do to maintain it, and what I should consider about it longer term. The accounts, the trusts, which were more numerous and more carefully constructed than I had known, because Harold had been building them quietly over a long time, and had not wanted to alarm me with the implications of the planning, which included planning for scenarios he preferred not to dwell on while they were still hypothetical. On the 3rd evening, he said, "There is something I need to tell you about the will." I said, "All right, I changed it," he said, 8 months ago. "You know some of what's in it. There are things I've added that I want you to hear from me rather than from Margaret. Margaret was our attorney, is our attorney, she is still mine." He told me what he had done. I sat across from him at the kitchen table and I listened, and when he was finished, I reached across and put my hand over his and I said, "You didn't have to." "I know I didn't have to," he said. "I wanted to. I wanted you to be safe, Sylvia. Whatever happens with the children, whatever Derek decides to be about any of this, I want you to be able to sit in this house and not be afraid." I squeezed his hand. He squeezed mine back. "You've always taken care of yourself," he said. "I know that, but I wanted to take care of you too. Just this once. Just this piece of it." 3 weeks later, he was gone. And Derek was standing in my living room telling his wife I wouldn't last long. He doesn't know, I thought, on the edge of the bed. Let me tell you what happened in the weeks after the funeral, because the progression of it matters and I will not skip it. Derek was attentive in the immediate aftermath. Attentive in the way of someone who has a stake in staying close and is intelligent enough to know that being visibly callous at a funeral is a strategic error. He called. He visited. He offered to help with things around the house, practical things, the gutters, the railing Harold had been considering, the question of the furnace filter. I accepted the help in some cases and declined it in others. and I watched him the way I have always watched situations I needed to understand. Carefully, without appearing to. He was assessing the property. I recognized it because I spent 28 years assessing things for a living, and the habits of assessment are visible to people who share them. The way his eyes moved across the house when he walked through it. The questions that seemed casual but were actually specific. When had the kitchen last been updated? Had Harold mentioned the terms of the mortgage? What was I thinking about longer term? None of these questions were asked directly. They were woven into ordinary conversation with the skill of a man who had done this kind of thing before and knew that directness too early produces defensiveness. He was building a picture. I gave him very little to work with. I said things like, "Oh, Harold handled all of that, and I'm still finding my feet, honestly. I'm sure things will become clearer once I've had time to sort through the paperwork." The language of a woman who is not quite managing, who is slightly overwhelmed, who has not yet gotten a firm grip on her situation. None of it was true. Within 2 weeks of the funeral, I had met with Margaret, our attorney, and sat across her desk and heard the full detailed documented version of what Harold had built. I had gone through the blue folder 3 more times. I had made my own notes, in my accountant's hand, the clear, precise notation I use when I need to understand something completely. I had spoken to our financial advisor. I had, with Margaret's assistance, begun the process of transferring certain accounts into structures that would simplify things going forward. I was not adrift. I was oriented. I knew exactly where I was standing and exactly what was under my feet. I knew more about the state of Harold's estate than Derek imagined in his most optimistic calculation. And what I knew was that Derek's calculation, whatever it was going to be wrong in ways that would take him some time to understand. I also knew something Derek did not know I knew. Harold had told me in those 3 evenings at the kitchen table that Derek had spoken to him about the house. Not recently, this had been 2 years before Harold died, before the illness had begun. In a conversation Harold had described to me at the time in the careful, neutral way he had when he was telling me something that had upset him and did not want to color my response with his reaction. Derek had suggested to Harold that it might make sense, financially practically, for Harold to transfer some of the property into Derek's name, for tax purposes, for simplicity. He had framed it as consideration for Harold's benefit, for ease of management. Harold, who had spent a career in civil litigation and who recognized the shape of what he was being asked, had declined, politely, without confrontation, in the way Harold handled things he found objectionable. By simply not doing them and not making a scene about it, he had not told Derek why he was declining. He had simply declined, but he had told me. And he had, in the months that followed that conversation, begun the additional work on the will that he described to me at the kitchen table 3 weeks before he died. So when Derek stood in my living room and told his wife I wouldn't last long, what he did not know was this: the will had been changed, not once, twice. The second change, made 8 months before Harold died, was the one Harold had told me about at the kitchen table. It was also the change that Derek, who had formed his expectations based on conversations with Harold that predated that change by years, had no knowledge of. He was calculating based on a document that no longer existed. The correct document was in Margaret's safe. I had a copy in the blue folder. Let me tell you about the months that followed. Because the story is not only the moment of the whisper and the moment of the revelation. It is also the months in between, which were their own kind of education. Derek's patience was considerable, which told me something about how seriously he took the stakes. He waited, he called. He visited, less frequently than in the immediate aftermath, but consistently, maintaining the presence of a concerned son without tipping into the kind of demand that would put me on alert. He brought his wife, Natasha, who is a pleasant woman in the specific way of people who have learned that pleasantness is a useful cover, and who watched me with an attention she probably thought was subtle and was not. He mentioned the house twice in the first 3 months. Once obliquely, a comment about the work a property this size required, the implication being that such a burden was considerable for a woman alone. Once more directly, a suggestion that it might be worth thinking about what made sense going forward, whether the house was really practical for one person, whether there were arrangements that might make more sense for everyone. Both times I said, I'm just not there yet. I need more time. Both times he nodded and moved on. What he did not know was that I had been to see Margaret 3 times in those months, that I had made 2 specific changes to my own will, the will I had entered the marriage with and updated several times since, that I had had 2 conversations with Pamela, Harold's daughter, my stepdaughter in every sense that mattered, the one who called every day for 2 months and who calls every Sunday still, in which I told her what Derek had said at the funeral and what I suspected he was planning and what I intended to do about it. Pamela said, "Sylvia, whatever you decide, I'm with you." I said, "I know. That's why I'm telling you." She said, "Do you need anything from me, practically speaking?" I said, not yet. I'll let you know. She said, he's always been like this, even when Dad was alive. I'm sorry you're dealing with it. I said, don't be sorry. I spent 28 years dealing with much worse. He's just not very good at hiding it. She laughed, which was the first time I had heard her laugh since Harold died, and the sound of it sat in my chest like something warm. 8 months after the funeral, Derek called me and said he'd like to come by. He had something he wanted to discuss. He said it in a tone that I recognized, the tone of a man who has decided the patience has been sufficient and the time for the next move has arrived. Not confrontational, not aggressive, businesslike, the tone of a meeting. I said, of course. I said Saturday. I put the kettle on when he arrived. We sat in Harold's study, which I had kept exactly as Harold left it, not from inability to change it, but from a considered decision that the study was Harold's room and I was not ready to make it something else and possibly would never be. The books on the shelves, the framed photographs on the desk, the model of a bridge Harold had kept from a case he was particularly proud of, all of it as he had left it. Derek had been in this room before. I watched his eyes move across it, and I watched him recalibrate something, not sure if sitting in his father's room was going to make what he planned to say easier or harder. He said, I wanted to talk about the estate. Now that some time has passed, I said. Of course, he said. I've been thinking about what makes sense going forward for everyone. He paused. I know you and Dad had things set up a certain way. I know you've been through a lot. But it seems like it might be worth having a conversation about the house, about the assets, about what the practical situation looks like. I said, that sounds reasonable. He seemed slightly surprised that I agreed so readily. He had prepared, I think, for more resistance at this stage. He continued, I know Dad had certain intentions, but intentions and practicalities aren't always the same thing. The house, for instance, it's a significant asset. And for one person, Derek, I said quietly, not harshly. The way I say things when I have decided something needs to stop. He stopped. I want to tell you something, I said, and I need you to listen completely before you respond. He nodded. He was watching me with a new attention. Something had shifted in the room, the quality of it, and I think he felt it before he understood it. I know what you said at your father's funeral, I said. The silence. I have described silences before in these stories, and this one was different from the others. The previous silences I have described were the silences of rooms full of people. This one was the silence of two people, one of whom had just understood that the room he thought he was in was not the room he was actually in. Derek's face did something careful and fast. He started to say something. Please, I said, I told you I needed you to listen. He closed his mouth. You told Natasha that I wouldn't last long, that the estate would go the right way, that you weren't worried. I paused. Let each sentence sit. I was in the hallway. I heard you. A longer silence. I want you to understand something, I said, not as an accusation, as information, because I think you have been operating, for some time, under assumptions that are going to cause you significant pain if they're not corrected now. I reached into the pocket of the cardigan I was wearing, and I took out a single sheet of paper. I set it on the desk between us. It was not the will. It was a summary, 1 page, the kind I used to prepare for clients, the kind that distills a complicated situation into its essential facts in plain language. Your father changed his will 8 months before he died, I said. He told me himself, at this desk, 3 weeks before he passed. He made changes because of a conversation you had with him 2 years before that about the property. He did not tell you he was making changes. He did not want a confrontation, but he made them. Derek was very still. The house is mine, I said, outright, not subject to any claim, any right of contest, any negotiation. Harold was a civil litigator for 40 years, and he knew exactly how to structure these things to be bulletproof, and he did. I looked at him directly. Your share of the estate is what Harold designated. It is fair. It is not small. It is not contingent on anything I do or don't do. It will come to you through Margaret when the process is complete. I put my hands flat on the desk. But the house is mine, I said again. And the assumption that I am a temporary inconvenience between you and an inheritance, I need you to release that assumption. Not for my sake, for yours. Because I am 72 years old, and I am in excellent health, and I intend to live in this house for a very long time, and I would like to do so with a stepson who has chosen to be a person his father would recognize. The silence had a different quality now, not the sharp surprise of the first one. Something slower. Something that was, I thought, the particular stillness of a man encountering for the first time the full shape of something he has only seen in parts. He looked at the summary on the desk. He did not pick it up. He really changed it, Derek said. Not a question. He really changed it, I said, because of what I said about the house, because of what you said about the house, and because... I stopped. Because he loved you, Derek, and he wanted you to receive something from him that was genuinely given, not something you'd maneuvered your way to. He thought that mattered. He thought the difference between those two things mattered. Derek looked up from the desk. His face was different from anything I had seen on it in 8 months of watching him carefully. Something had gone out of it. Not the charm, which was still available to him, but the calculation behind the charm, the management. What was left looked, for a moment, considerably younger than 54. He was disappointed in me, Derek said. I could have said yes. It would have been accurate. Harold had not used the word disappointed, but the shape of what he described was disappointment. Instead, I said, he was worried about you. He was worried about what you were becoming. He thought the conversation about the property indicated something about how you were thinking about your life, and he wanted. I paused. He wanted you to build something of your own. He said that to me. He said he was afraid you'd spent so long calculating what you'd inherit that you'd forgotten to make something. Derek looked at the model of the bridge on Harold's desk, the one from the case Harold was proud of. He told me about that bridge, Derek said, when I was maybe 12. He drove me out to see the actual bridge. He thought it was so important. A pause. I thought it was boring. He knew that, I said. He took you anyway. We sat in the quiet of Harold's study for a moment that had no agenda in it, which was the first moment in 8 months of Derek's visits that had felt that way. I picked up the summary from the desk. I put it back in my pocket. I'm not your enemy, I said. I've never been your enemy. I loved your father. I intend to honor his memory in this house for as long as I live in it, and after that, after me, there are arrangements Harold made that you will understand when the time comes. Not what you expected, but not nothing. Derek was quiet. He thought about you, I said, even when he was disappointed. Especially then, maybe. That's what fathers do. I stood up. The conversation was over, not because I was dismissing him, but because everything that needed to be said had been said, and the rest was his to sit with. He stood. He looked around Harold's study one more time. At the door, he stopped. He didn't look at me. He said, to the doorframe or the hallway or Harold's absence. I didn't think he'd actually do it. He was a very thorough man, I said. Derek made a sound that was almost a laugh. Just almost. He left. I went back into the study and I sat in Harold's chair, which I do not usually sit in, and I looked at the model of the bridge and the books on the shelves and the reading glasses on the side table that I have still not moved and do not intend to move. I think that went all right, I said to the room, to Harold, who was the room, in all the ways that matter. Now let me tell you what happened after. Because the story does not end in Harold's study on a Saturday afternoon, and I have promised you the full accounting, and you have stayed with me this long, and you deserve it. Pamela called that evening. I had texted her when Derek left. 2 words. Done. Good. And she had been waiting. I told her everything. She was quiet for a moment when I finished. Then she said, how do you feel? I thought about it genuinely. I feel like I put something down, I said. Something heavy that I didn't realize I was carrying. Dad would have. She stopped. I know, I said. I thought about him the whole time. He really did prepare for everything. He really did. The bridge model, she said. She had grown up with it too. He took me to see the actual bridge, too. I was 11. I thought it was wonderful. He knew that, too, I said. He was paying attention. He always was. She called the next Sunday. And the Sunday after. This is what she has always done, and I have come to understand it as one of the most important structures in my life. The Sunday call from Pamela, dependable as weather, the thing that tells me the week is done. And I have gotten through it. Derek called 3 weeks after the meeting in the study. Not with a plan. Not with an agenda I could detect. He called to ask how I was doing. I said I was doing well, which was true. He said he'd been thinking about some things. I said, that seems right. He said, I want to. I don't know how to. He stopped. I wasn't a good son to him. I knew it while it was happening, and I didn't change it, and now I can't. I waited. I don't know what to do with that, he said. I thought about Harold. About what Harold had said to me on the 3rd evening at the kitchen table, when we had finished the blue folder and were just sitting together in the kitchen, in the way of people who have covered the territory and are resting before what comes next. He had said, whatever happens with Derek after I go, don't write him off, not because he deserves it, because he might surprise you, and because I wasn't able to get through to him and maybe someone else can. I had promised. You can't fix what you didn't do, I said to Derek, but you can decide what you do from now. That's the only choice that's still available. A long pause. Dad used to say something like that, he said. I know. He said it to me too, more than once. Another pause. Would you? He stopped. Started differently. Could I come by sometime? Not to talk about anything. Just to the study. I'd like to sit in his study for a while. I thought about the room. The books, the bridge model, the reading glasses. Harold's room still Harold's and likely to remain so. Yes, I said. Come on a Sunday afternoon, I'll make tea. He came. He sat in Harold's chair. I offered it, deliberately, and he looked at the study, the way people look at places that contain someone they have lost and are only now understanding they have lost. Not the asset he had been walking through before, the room. He picked up the bridge model, turned it in his hands. I remember this, he said. He was very proud of that case, I said. He drove me 3 hours to see the actual bridge. A pause. I complained the whole way. He took you anyway, I said, for the 2nd time, but it landed differently now. Derek set the model down carefully. He looked at the photograph on the desk. Harold at 60, at some outdoor event. laughing in the full-chested way he had when something was genuinely funny. "I didn't tell him I was proud of him," Derek said. "I don't think I ever said that." I was quiet for a moment. "He knew," I said. "He told me more than once that you were capable of things you hadn't yet chosen to do. That was a kind of pride in the potential of you." Derek looked at the photograph. "That sounds like him," he said, infuriatingly optimistic. "Till the," I said. We drank tea in Harold's study for an hour and a half. We talked about Harold. Not about the estate, not about the house, not about any of the things that had organized Derek's visits for the previous 8 months. About Harold. The bridge. The way he argued about property law at dinner parties. The reading glasses he left on every surface in the house. The absolute certainty, maintained warmly and without arrogance, that things generally worked out for people who prepared carefully and acted with integrity. At the end, Derek stood up and looked around the room one more time. At the books and the bridge and the photograph and the reading glasses on the side table, he said, "Sylvia." I said, "Yes." He said, "I'm sorry." For he made a small gesture that I understood to mean everything. The funeral, the 8 months, the calculation, the assumption. All of it. I looked at him. Harold's son, 54 years old, standing in his father's room holding a cup of tea, looking younger than he had looked in all the visits that had preceded this one. "I know," I said. "Your father would be glad you said it." He nodded. He left. "Let me tell you where I am now." It is a Thursday afternoon in April, and I am sitting at the kitchen table with the blue folder open in front of me. Not because I need to refer to it, but because I take it out sometimes and look at Harold's handwriting on the tabs and feel the weight of all the care that went into what's inside it. The kitchen smells like the soup I have on the stove, the vegetable soup I make on Thursdays because Harold loved it, and because making it on Thursdays is a way of keeping Thursday as the day it always was. The reading glasses are still on the side table in the hall. The bridge model is still in the study. The house is mine. It is in my name, protected in the way Harold spent the last year of his life protecting it, bulletproof, in the way Margaret confirmed 3 times when I asked. I will live in it for as long as it suits me to live in it, and after that it will go where Harold determined it should go. In the documents in Margaret's safe, the ones in the blue folder, the structure of a life's careful preparation. Pamela calls on Sundays. We have plans to go to Portland in June, where she lives, and she has promised to take me to a farmer's market she loves and to show me the coast, which I have not seen since Harold and I went 12 years ago on the trip we always meant to take again. Derek called last week, not to discuss anything practical, to tell me he had started, at his wife Natasha's encouragement, volunteering with a legal aid organization, doing intake, helping people understand their options in situations that overwhelmed them. He thought I might find that interesting, given my background. I did find it interesting. I told him Harold would find it interesting, too. There was a pause, and then Derek said, "I thought about that. Before I started, I thought, would this be a thing he'd respect?" "And?" I said. "And I decided it would," he said. So I did it. I want to say something before I close, because I have been circling it since the beginning of this story, and it deserves to be said plainly. Harold spent the last year of his life building something he hoped he would never need. He changed the will. He organized the blue folder. He sat at the kitchen table for 3 evenings and walked me through everything, not because he expected disaster, but because he understood that preparation is not pessimism, it is love. It is the specific expression of love that says, I am going to make sure that when I am not here, the person I love is not afraid. That is what the blue folder was. That is what the changed will was. That is what the 3 evenings at the kitchen table were. He was not preparing for Derek to be a villain. He was preparing for me to be safe. Those are different things, even if they produce the same documents. I think about this when I look at the blue folder. I think about what it means to love someone in the language of preparation. Harold didn't tell me how much he loved me with the blue folder. He had other ways of telling me that, private ways, the ways of 16 years of a good marriage, and I do not need to share them here because they are mine. But the blue folder was a kind of love, too. The kind that works while you are sleeping. The kind that holds even after the person who made it is gone. If someone in your life has prepared something for you, a document, a plan, a conversation they sat you down for when things were quiet, I hope you received it as the love it was. And if you are the person who should be preparing something, and you have not yet done it, I hope this story reminds you that the right time to build the floor is before the ground shifts. Harold built the floor, I am standing on it, and the house is warm, and the soup is on the stove, and the reading glasses are on the hall table, and the light through the kitchen window in April is exactly what it always was, which is the best thing I know how to say about how things are. I am not going anywhere. I am here in this house, in this life, for as long as I choose. And the will says so. There is something else I want to tell you. Something I have been holding back, not for dramatic effect. I am too old for that, and this story is too true for it, but because it is the piece that surprised even me, and I wanted to find the right words for it before I said it. 2 months after Derek came to sit in Harold's study and held the bridge model and told me he was sorry, I received something in the mail. It was a card, handwritten. The handwriting was not one I recognized immediately, and I turned the envelope over twice looking for a return address before I found the name on the back flap. Natasha. Derek's wife. I opened it. The card was plain, not a commercial sympathy card with pre-printed sentiment, a plain card, the kind you buy for the purpose of writing something specific. And she had written something specific. She wrote, "Dear Sylvia, I want you to know that I heard what Derek said at the funeral. I was standing next to him. I knew immediately that it was wrong. I did not say so at the time, which I have not forgiven myself for, because the moment called for someone to say something and I did not. I want you to know that I have thought about Harold a great deal in the past months, not the estate or the house, but the person. Derek has told me stories. I have seen the photographs. I have sat in that study where you were kind enough to let us in and looked at the things he kept. I think he was an extraordinary man, and I am sorry for your loss in a way I was not capable of when I did not yet understand what you had lost. Derek is trying. I want you to know that I am aware of what that costs him, and I am grateful to you for making it possible. He is a better man than he was 8 months ago. I believe he is capable of being better still. Thank you for not writing us off. Natasha, I read it twice. I sat at the kitchen table with the card in my hands, and I read it twice. Then I went and sat in Harold's study in his chair where I sat on the afternoon Derek left and said it was all right to the room. You were right. I said about the surprising. You were right. I put the card in the blue folder. It belongs there. It is part of what the folder is now, not just Harold's preparation, but the result of it. The thing the preparation made possible. A handwritten card from a woman who had been standing next to her husband when he said I wouldn't last long, who had said nothing then and said everything now, in a plain card in the mail on a Tuesday morning in April. Harold prepared the ground. I planted something, and something is growing. That is how these things work, when they work. Not dramatically, not all at once. Slowly, in the way of things that are actually going to last. A little at a time, in the ordinary mornings, in the soup on the stove and the Sunday phone calls and the card in the mail and the reading glasses on the hall table that nobody is going to move. The most important structures are the ones you can't see until you need them. Harold built the one I'm standing on. I am building the ones that come next. I do not know what Derek will do with what his father left him. Not the money, but the example. The man who drove 3 hours to show a bored 12-year-old a bridge he was proud of. The man who changed the will quietly and without confrontation. The man who told me at the kitchen table that he wanted me to be safe. The man who was infuriatingly optimistic till the end. Derek has the model of the bridge. I gave it to him before he left that Sunday. I want you to know that because it matters. I said, I think he'd want you to have it. Derek looked at it in his hands for a long moment. Then he said, I'll take care of it. I know you will, I said. He took it home. I think about it sometimes. The bridge model on a shelf somewhere in Derek's house, wherever he put it, where he can see it when he is trying to decide what kind of person he is going to be. A small model of a structure his father built a case around because he believed the structure was good and the structure held. That is what Harold was trying to tell him, driving 3 hours to see a bridge with a bored 12-year-old. Some things hold. If you build them right and you understand what they're for, and you don't cut corners on the material, they hold. The house on Pembroke Lane is holding. Pamela calls on Sundays. The soup is on the stove. The reading glasses are on the hall table. And I am standing on the floor Harold built for me, solid and safe and warm, in the house that is mine, in the life that was ours, in the love that does not end because the person who built it is gone. It only changes form, finds new places to live, turns up in unexpected envelopes in the mail on Tuesday mornings in April. That is my story. If it found you when you needed it. If you have stood in a hallway with a cold cup of tea and heard something that was meant to be hidden and felt the particular weight of being underestimated. Leave a comment. Tell me about it. I am here. I read everyone. Subscribe. Because next week I want to tell you about the Sunday Pamela and I went to Portland, and the farmer's market, and the things she said about her father while we were standing at a stall full of spring flowers, and why I cried right there among the people and the flowers, and did not mind at all who saw. Some things take their time arriving, but when they arrive, they are worth the wait. I want to go back to the beginning, not the beginning of the story, the beginning underneath the story, the part that explains why I was standing in the hallway at all. Harold used to say that every situation has a before that most people ignore. He was a litigator. He understood that the event everyone wants to talk about, the breach, the incident, the thing that broke, is almost never where the case actually lives. The case lives in the before, in the 10 small decisions that preceded the large one, in the accumulating pattern that produced the single visible moment. He said this about his cases. He also said it about life. Because Harold was one of those people for whom the professional and the personal were not separate territories, but the same country explored from different vantage points. The before of my story with Derek is longer than 8 months. It is longer than the 16 years of my marriage to Harold. It begins, I think, in a place I was not present for. In the particular childhood that Derek had, in the particular things the childhood taught him about security and what it meant and how you got it and whether it could be taken away. I have told you that Harold and his first wife divorced when Derek was young and that it was difficult. What I have not told you is what Harold told me about the specific shape of that difficulty, because I want you to understand Derek the way I came to understand him. Not as a villain, not as a cautionary tale, but as a person whose worst behaviors had comprehensible origins, which is not the same as excusing them but is necessary for dealing with them honestly. Derek was 7 when the marriage ended. He was old enough to understand that something large and stable had become unstable, not old enough to understand why or to be told the truth about it. He lived primarily with his mother, who was, by Harold's account, a woman of considerable capability who was also deeply and understandably angry, and who sometimes expressed that anger in ways that Harold became aware of only in retrospect. In the things Derek said, as an adult, in the distortions of memory that had calcified into the stories Derek told himself about his childhood. One of those stories was this, that what you have can always be taken away, and the corollary, that the only real security is what you can get hold of and hold tight. Harold understood this about Derek by the time he was 30. He had tried to address it, not directly, because Derek would not receive directness on the subject, but obliquely, through example, through conversations that approached the edges of it. Harold was patient. Harold was also, by his own admission, not as effective with Derek as he might have been, because he carried his own guilt about the divorce, and that guilt sometimes made him retreat when he should have pressed forward. He told me this at the kitchen table on the third evening, with the blue altar open between us. I let him be angry at me when he should have been angry at the situation, Harold said. And in doing that, I confirmed for him that the anger was correct, that I was the kind of person who disappointed people, that he was right not to trust easily. He paused. I don't know that I handled that well. You couldn't change his childhood, I said. No. But I could have been clearer about who I was while he was in it. And afterward, I managed things. I kept things smooth. I thought if things were smooth enough, he would eventually be, he searched for the word, settled. I thought the settling would come if the surface was smooth, but it didn't. The settling would have come from talking about the hard things, Harold said, and I didn't do enough of that. I was good at talking about almost everything. I wasn't good at talking about that. I put my hand over his. He turned his hand over and held mine. You're telling me now, I said. I'm telling you now, he said, because you need to understand him, not to excuse him. 2. Navigate him after. I squeezed his hand. He squeezed mine back. He's not a bad man, Harold said. He is a man who learned the wrong lessons from a hard thing and never entirely unlearned them. He needs someone to reflect something different back to him. I hope, he stopped. I hope he meets enough of that, eventually, from somewhere. I thought about this throughout the 8 months of Derek's visits. I thought about it when he walked through the house assessing. When he mentioned the property twice, with the practiced casualness of someone who has rehearsed the approach. When he sat across the desk in the study and listened to me tell him what he didn't know. And I thought about it when he asked if he could come and sit in the study. When he held the bridge model. When he said, to the room or to Harold's absence, that he had never told his father he was proud of him. This is the thing I want you to hear, underneath the story of the will and the whisper and the accountant who kept her face neutral while she knew exactly what was in every document. Harold did not change the will to punish Derek. He changed it to protect me, yes. And he changed it because he knew that Derek, if he received something he had maneuvered his way to, would understand from that transaction that maneuvering worked, would carry that lesson forward, would be confirmed in the thing he had already believed since he was 7 years old, that security is not built, it is captured. Harold wanted to interrupt that lesson, not by disinheriting Derek. The estate was fair, provision was genuine, and Harold never entertained anything else, but by making sure the capture did not work. That the thing Derek thought he could reach for was not reachable in the way he imagined, that the floor was built differently than the blueprint he had drawn in his head. Because Harold believed, infuriatingly and correctly and up to the end, that Derek was capable of building something of his own if he was made to try. The legal aid work, the card from Natasha, these did not surprise Harold, I think. If Harold is somewhere with opinions about how things have gone, and I choose to believe he is, because the alternative is that the person I loved most is simply gone, and some mornings that is not a thing I can hold, he is not surprised. He is, in the specific way he was when things went the way he had hoped, quietly satisfied, not smug. Harold was never smug, just confirmed. A quiet click of something settling into place the way well-built things settle. He built for this outcome, the way he built for everything. I need to tell you about the letter. In the blue folder, behind the will summary and the trust documents and the financial statements, there was an envelope. I had noticed it on the second evening at the kitchen table, and Harold had said, not yet, not that one. On the third evening, when we had covered everything else, he took it out and held it for a moment and then handed it to me. "This is for later," he said. "Not right away, when things have settled. When you have a sense of how it's going, you'll know when." I put it in the folder. I opened it 6 months after the funeral on a Sunday morning in September after Pamela's call. I do not know why that morning specifically. Something told me the time had come, and in my experience, something is usually right. Inside was a letter. 3 pages, Harold's handwriting, the hand I had been reading for 16 years, and that I can still read in my head in his voice, which sounds exactly like him, the particular cadence of a careful man who chooses every word with the attention it deserves. I am not going to read you the letter. It was written for me. It lives in the blue folder, and it is mine, and I will not share it, because there are things that belong to 2 people, and that is one of them. "But I will tell you one thing," he said. "Just one, because it is the thing that turned everything. The whole 8 months, the whole shape of what I was doing and why, into something I could understand as more than just survival." He said, "I know that what I'm leaving you is not just the house and the accounts in the folder. I'm leaving you the ongoing project of this family, which is messy and imperfect and will require more of you than is fair. I am sorry for that, and I am leaving you the knowledge that I believe you are precisely equal to it. Not because you are easy or comfortable or uncomplicated, but because you are the most fundamentally decent person I have ever known, and decent people have a way of making the situations they're in a little more decent too. Not always, not perfectly, but a little. I have watched you do it for 16 years. I'm asking you to keep doing it." I sat at the kitchen table on a September Sunday, and I read that paragraph 4 times. Then I put the letter back in the envelope, back in the blue folder, and I went and put the kettle on. Keep doing it. I am keeping doing it. Pamela calls on Sundays. Derek calls less regularly, but when he does, the calls are different from what they were. Less managed, less careful in the strategic sense, more like talking and less like positioning. He told me last month that Natasha is expecting their first child. He told me the way a person tells you a thing they are genuinely happy about, without any apparent calculation, just happiness. I told him Harold would have been so pleased. He was quiet for a moment, and then he said yes. Just yes. Simply. I am 72 years old. I live in the house on Pembroke Lane, the house Harold and I made together, where the reading glasses are on the hall table, and the soup goes on the stove on Thursdays, and the blue folder is in the filing cabinet in the study, and the light in April through the kitchen window is exactly what it always was. I am not going anywhere, and the will says so. That is the full story: the whisper at the funeral, the cold cup of tea, the blue folder, the 3 evenings at the kitchen table, the meeting in the study, and the 2 words I said. All right, when I needed him to stop. The summary on the desk, the bridge model in Derek's house, the card from Natasha in the blue folder, the letter I opened on a September Sunday, the legal aid work, the child on the way. Harold prepared the ground. Things are growing. If you have been carrying something since someone whispered something they didn't know you heard, put it down. Not because it doesn't matter, because you are carrying enough already, and the thing they whispered was wrong. And you don't need to carry their wrongness on top of your own weight. You know what you have. You know what was built for you and what you've built yourself. You know what the folder contains and what the will says and what the floor feels like under your feet. Let them whisper. You already changed the document. Drop a comment. Tell me about the moment you understood that you already knew more than they thought you did. I am here. I read everyone. And I will see you next week in Portland at the farmer's market, among the spring flowers where I cried in front of everyone and did not mind at all. Some things take their time arriving, but when they arrive, they are exactly right.